This is episode number 129 of the Mixology Talk Podcast, and this week we will once again focus on career and skill development. In particular, we will be discussing some of the fundamentals of inventory, why it's such a vital subject to understand, and plenty of tips and tricks along the way. Who better to walk us through this often misunderstood subject than Trevor Bernatchez, Customer Education Manager at BevSpot, who also happens to be this episode's sponsor. Stay tuned as we learn more about everyone's favorite subject, that's right, inventory. Thanks for joining us today on Mixology Talk Podcast. Once again, we're focusing on data, and I'm super excited. We have Trevor from BevSpot here. So thank you, Trevor, for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris. Trevor from BevSpot, Customer Education Manager, and all around passionate about inventory for sure.
Now, can you do me a favor and just kind of give me an overview of kind of your industry experience before you came into BevSpot?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I started out when I was 15 years old doing two things I said I would never do. One, work for my father, and B, work in the restaurant industry because he had my entire life.
Sure.
But, one thing led to another. My childhood paper route was ripped from me unceremoniously as they were getting rid of all the child carriers for probably obvious reasons.
Right.
So I started bussing tables when I was 15 years old. And did that until I was about 16, which in New Hampshire, where I'm from, that's the legal age of becoming a barback, believe it or not. You can handle closed alcohol once you're 16 in New Hampshire.
Wow.
That's why I call it Texas of the North. I love it. So once I started doing that, really passively, started absorbing all this information, mostly about wine and spirits. Beer still at the time was still kind of, your standard, domestic lights at the time kind of thing. So It wasn't the huge expansion we've seen in the last 10 years, but did that for a couple of years. And then once I was old enough, once I was 18 years old, actually started serving tables. And then through that process, that whole summer before I went to college, just kind of got the lay of the land, really wrapped my head around how that worked. And then once I came down to school, I went to Berklee College of Music here in Boston, actually. Okay. Yeah. And once I did that, I needed to learn how to work in the restaurant industry anyway as a lifelong companion to being a musician. So I kind of dove in headlong at that point and just transferred right down into the city to the same restaurant company. I actually worked for the same restaurant company for about 12 of those 15 years that I worked in the industry. And then, all through college, put myself through college serving tables with the help of Aunt Sally Mae on the side. And once it was graduation time, started tending bar a little bit, learning the ropes there. Again, really basic stuff kind of thing, as much as you teach a bar back to kind of pour, mixed drinks for you if you're too in the weeds doing actual full-on cocktails and stuff like that. And, kind of worked my way up through the company through different, tiers of restaurant from, just fast casual to higher end seafood as far as, finer dining, if you will.
Sure.
Did that for, 5 years there, met my future now current wife there. So we met working in the industry. So very similar to how you guys actually came together as well, I would imagine. And then through that process, really started really falling in love with the world of wine. And through doing that, turned myself into a server trainer where me and a couple other my colleagues made this wine training program because, as you know, out here anyway, the winter months are really slow on restaurants. Right. I think generally across the board. But we were trying to find a way to up our sales internally with, having fewer guests sitting on our seats in the bar and even at the tables too. So was able to kind of work with colleagues to make this wine training program of our wine list because there's, 200 plus bottles that are really inaccessible to a lot of us. Sure. So, kind of cut my teeth in wine education there. And then once I left that restaurant, went into wine retail where I actually was in charge of inventory, ordering control on a retail side of things. So that's where majority of my inventory experience started from actually, well before I worked here at BevSpot. And then from that, my wine knowledge, spirits and beer just exploded and the passion for it just got even bigger because I'm literally in a store where all four walls are covered in beer, wine, and spirits all day, every day. And you can't help but, this, you just can't help but starting to look into the story behind every single bottle, whether it's wine or, especially whiskeys. I was really interested in how whiskeys are made and what differentiated a Scotch from an Irish whiskey and an American whiskey and bourbon versus rye and that kind of thing. So really just exploded my knowledge there. And then right as I was leaving that store to go back into the world of restaurants and bars, I decided to take it upon myself as the most affordable form of higher education to actually get myself certified sommelier. So
Nice.
I went through that process, which was that's a whole nother podcast experience right there.
Yeah.
And then from there, that last restaurant I worked at for the last 18 months or so before coming to BevSpot really is where I started getting, the bar manager there kind of took me under his wing and really started showing me the ropes of the true kind of mixology. And as I was mentioning, your episode on gum syrups and things like that, he was the one who actually taught me all about that, and which is why that particular episode jumped out at me. And 15 minutes of gum Arabic, you wouldn't necessarily think it's a broadly appealing topic, but for this industry, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff, getting into the nitty gritty of it was that I was really interested in. And then from there, we got married, and my wife worked a 9 to 5, and I worked 5 to midnight. So figured that it wasn't really going to be sustainable for a lifetime together of happiness. So I decided it was time to foray that world into something a little bit more, daytime, if you will, without working just day shifts all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I actually stumbled across BevSpot, to be honest with you, and came in here. And over the last couple of years, have been really able to help the company, build a really solid, tangible, easy to access training program for new people coming into the software.
Sure. And so for anybody that doesn't kind of know BevSpot or have been familiar with them, we've actually done some, we worked together on a craft bartender summit a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And kind of talking about the power of data, but you guys really focus on inventory control, right? Is that kind of the focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the main impetus of the software being built. Before I joined the company, our CEO and co-founders kind of realized that, and as you know too, the industry is so antiquated in the way that you need to actually procure your product and get it in-house, and actually how you're actually counting it and organizing it and thinking about it. It was all in these disparate systems where you have a lot of counts in Excel or even on paper with clipboards. You're calling some sales reps, you're texting some sales reps, you're emailing some sales reps, some you're meeting with in person, face-to-face. And for me, when I was on the retail side of things doing this, I had all this information across all these different avenues. And it was really hard for me, even just to maintain a budget every single week with, some of my orders and emails, some were sitting on my phone, some were just in my head from conversations I had face-to-face with people, which is a dangerous place to keep things when you work in that kind of world. So yeah, that's the real main goal was through inventory control and nice, clean, and easy to understand data, being able to see all this about your bar program all in one place. That way you can really make those good business decisions. So you're not overstocking, understocking, or worse, just completely blowing out the budget every single week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you've never been exposed to this type of software before, I was early in my management career. I was lucky enough, one of the restaurants I was working at had this kind of type of software, and it changes the way you look at the business. I mean, It really does. It gives you, granularity you wouldn't have if you were running on spreadsheets, and you can see the whole picture versus just, to your point, kind of little tiny snippets of the business here and there. Once you see that holistic numbers and data and all that, it makes it so much easier to navigate and make better business decisions, for sure. Now, so you at BevSpot, I think you mentioned this before, but what's the role you're in now?
So my technical title is I'm the Customer Education Manager.
Nice.
So I curate all the Help Center content, all how-to videos, live webinars, recorded webinars, anything that has any kind of educational focus, both for our product, and now I'm starting to expand it a little bit more broadly into more industry-facing topics as opposed to just our software as well. So that's really my goal here, is to educate both our customers, but also the industry as a whole on anything they might be unsure of. Like you said, some people kind of, as you work your way up through the bar world, you're going to fall into being a bar manager more often than not. It kind of just falls into your lap as someone, leaves the business, and then all of a sudden you're expected to know all of these skills immediately, which, I mean, you've done the job before. There's so much that you just have to learn as you go. There's no real kind of guidebook for it necessarily. And that's what I'm trying to alleviate some of that as much as possible from where I sit.
Yeah, and we talked about this before offline, but one of the things that I love about BevSpot is you guys have some of the best resources out there. I mean, you have a bunch of free material out there that really kind of breaks down bar management. I looked on it earlier today, and I think there's 2 pages of just downloaded resources, templates,
Yeah.
bar management 101 guides. I mean, some really, really powerful stuff that just doesn't exist out there until you guys created it. So like I mentioned, any time I get questions about introductory bar management, you're one of the first resources I point people into. So thank you for what you guys provide over there, man.
Hey, thank you for spreading the word on your side of the country. It's much
Yeah,
appreciated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So as many of you probably know, the focus of today is going to be all about inventory control. So we have an expert here, Trevor. So definitely appreciate your time, Trevor.
Yeah.
And he's going to kind of walk us through this menacing and often misunderstood world of inventory management. So thanks again, man, for joining us.
No, thanks so much for having me. Definitely excited to chat about it.
Yeah, and this is something you and I share a lot of passion for, and I love it. I know a lot of people hate it. You say the word inventory in the wrong company, and you could be you run out of town pretty quick.
Oh, that room will clear faster than you can believe. You say that word in some places, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hoping that you can kind of give us a kind of a 30,000 foot level overview of why inventory is such a critical part of running a successful bar program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, the first reason that really comes to mind is simple, but it's one that a lot of people don't think of right away. And is as a bar or restaurant owner, inventory is absolutely your largest asset. Really, I mean, it represents a huge investment of your business's cash, and you're not going to be able to use that for any other outflow purposes whatsoever. So if you're just buying things without keeping track, you're really not going to have a good understanding of where your dollars are going. And as a small business owner in this day and age, that is a horrifying concept to me, because every dollar you actually spend on your inventory, it's a dollar, like I said, you can't put towards other costs. Like bar repairs, pay raises for deserving staff, or for yourself if you can make that decision. So you really need to keep track of how much and what variety of product you're going through. That way you don't overstock, don't understock, blow out your budget, and really just make sure you're purchasing the product that actually sells, because that's really what's going to drive those profits, to be honest with you.
Right, absolutely. And just as a kind of a basic overview, how is inventory typically performed in most restaurants?
Yeah, well, at the core of taking inventory counts, all you really need, if you kind of break all this other stuff down, all you really need to have is all of your product organized in a way that makes it really accessible or visible, and a way to record the counts. So whether that's, whether you use a clipboard or a pencil or, some kind of text solution like we provide, it all comes down to taking regular, accurate inventory counts to make sure you have a nice solid pulse on the majority of your bar's cash flow.
Sure. And now I've kind of talked to a couple different bar managers, and they seem to fall in a couple different camps. Actually, probably about 3 camps. One is they do a regimented 30-day inventory at the end of the month, or some fixed time point. They do that. Others do it weekly as part of their ordering process. And there's others I've worked with and talked to that never do one. They have no idea what is in their inventory at any given point. And this is owners, this is managers. It's quite common, I think, in the industry not to do inventory. So why would it be important to actually do these, and what routine or what time frame would you recommend?
Absolutely. And generally, as far as time frame, when people ask me that question, I always put a caveat out there: whatever is going to make the most sense for your business structure. And meaning, what do you have available for resources to actually count your products? Do you have 4 people on your staff? Do you have 40,000 people on your staff? Whatever it might be. But whatever you decide makes the most sense for your business, whether it's weekly, monthly, 2 times a month, once every 6 months. We always recommend from where we sit as doing it as regularly and as often as possible. Just because, like I said, it's your money. It's your money. I mean, how often I check my bank account? Probably 3 times a week personally, just to make sure everything's where it needs to be. And when this is representing, thousands and thousands of dollars of business money, which then represents, people's salaries, people's tips, incomes down the line, always want to do it as much as possible. But above all else, I always insist on consistency. So if you decide that it's 1 week, every week, do it the same day every week, because you're always going to get that same length of time between inventory counts to give you a much better indication of what you're using. And if it's every month, that's totally fine as well, as long as you're kind of taking regular spot checks as you're placing those orders every single week. So generally, I recommend weekly. because you're ordering weekly as well. And that's just a really good way to think about it. A lot of people separate ordering and inventory in their minds. And personally, I think they're two sides of the same coin. You really inventory to order. That way you're not over ordering and you're ordering exactly what you need. So for my seat, I generally recommend every single week. But I always put the caveat out there. If that doesn't make sense for your business, don't force it. Right. The last thing you want to do is, like you said, people run for the hills when they hear the word inventory. You don't want to alienate your staff in that way by, trying to stick that square peg in a round hole kind of situation. Just what makes the most sense for your business. And then also what's going to give you the most visibility into that bar program. So you can always see where every dollar is coming and going from.
Right. Yeah. For me, I always kind of fell in the camp of 30-day windows, just 30 days. And then if there was a problem in the beverage program where I knew my cost of goods were out of line, I wasn't quite hitting the numbers, then I would start to go to weeklies. And if it still didn't get corrected, I would go to dailies. Like I would do specific audits on very specific products. So I know how much was leaving at any certain point. But yeah, 30-day windows always worked for me. Like I said, others I know did the 7. That just seems like a lot of work on my end. Yeah. But you're definitely going to get the best numbers on a weekly inventory cycle for sure. Now, on that side of kind of the business, inventory makes a lot of sense for bar managers and owners, right? Because you understand where your cash is going. But for bartenders, they never really see that side of the business. So why should a bartender care about inventory control? Because as sometimes you give away a free drink, and you get tipped on that. That could be a whole part of the business that we probably rarely talk about, especially on this podcast, but it happens. Yeah. It happens. So why should a bartender care so much about what their numbers are in inventory control?
Yeah. I mean, it's a loaded question for sure. But, but honestly, from me, it's as simple as pride in your job, to be honest with you. There's historically been a lack of pride in some of the more vocational career paths out there, some of the more acquired skills. And whether it's in your job description or not, I think inventory should really be everyone's responsibility. And if this bartender takes pride in their craft, and I truly do think all bartenders should hold their heads up high, considering the amount of training and skill that goes into being successful in this world, they need to take ownership of the tools and products that actually allow them to thrive in this type of environment. And, every bartender, I'm sure you do for certain drinks, everyone has their go-to products for specific cocktails. And if you really want to make sure that they're always there to keep your regular patrons coming back for more, and more importantly, lining your pockets with their tips, they should probably make sure they're doing their part to keep the bar stocked with all the top selling products that they use to kind of wow those customers every single night.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing worse than being in the weeds on a Friday night and then you're 86, a rye that's on your menu or something else like that. And you have to do a quick swap. It's not quite as good. And all of a sudden your costs start going out of line too, depending on how, expensive that product could be. Yeah. For sure. So, now when we start to look at people that have never done inventory before, this could be a big thing to tackle, right? I mean, we're talking about a complete overhaul of business, because there's a lot that goes into not only taking inventory, but what do you do with the data afterwards, right? And then all the downstream effects that happen after that. So how would you recommend, like I said, I've worked with quite a few customers that have never done an inventory. How would you recommend them to just get started?
Yeah, well, honestly, just like with anything else new, there's going to be a learning curve here. So definitely learn to walk before you run. I know it's a really tired cliche, but it's absolutely true here. So I generally suggest taking that first inventory count the old-fashioned analog way with pencil, not a pen, pencil and paper. Because mistakes are definitely going to happen and you want to be able to kind of cleanly keep that thing nice and organized, especially the first time. So I often equate this to learning long division in the 3rd grade as an example. They make you do it by hand for an entire year to really understand the inner workings of this process before you get that calculator, that shiny blue calculator in the 4th grade to make the process a little bit easier and a little bit quicker. And so a huge part of taking successful inventory counts, I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, is the prep work that you put into it. So if you're going to be taking inventory, your first inventory ever, if you're going to be taking that first thing in the morning, as you're closing the bar the night before, just get yourself organized really easily. As you're wiping down your bottles, just make sure you pull them all forward on the bar or anywhere else where you can have better visibility of them.
Sure.
And then something we all have behind our bars are those little nooks and crannies where you either hide, B&B plates, roll-ups, napkins, silverware, or you stock in, your bitters, things like that are small enough that you can stash in these places. But when you're taking inventory count, especially the first time, you're going to forget that all these things are there. So pull everything out as easily as possible so it's all in a visible place. And then something important to remember that it's the first inventory count. So you're not going to have that much fun doing this. It's your first time through. It's going to be a little bit painful. It's going to be okay. But like I said, there's a learning curve and you're definitely you have to take your lumps along the way, but just stick with it, because if you put in the time to start taking regular inventory counts for your bar program, it really, really will. And you can attest to this too. It really will start paying off for you, either in your personal career as, building your own personal kind of repertoire of tools you have as a bar manager or bartender. And then if you're the owner or have any kind of ownership stake, it really is going to improve your business. It's not going to happen overnight, but at the same time, you're going to start to have that visibility, and really starting to understand your bar program is really kind of at the core of taking regular inventory counts.
Yeah, and for me, it was always one of those things, especially as a bar manager, is these are very specific numbers that you can start to put in and save for the next time you look for a job, right?
Yeah.
You come in, you do your inventory, you realize that you're running, let's say, a 28% cost of goods, which is traditionally fairly high for a beverage program, for a spirits program anyways.
Yeah.
Then, if you start to improve those numbers over time, you can say, hey, look, I was in charge of this, $8 million restaurant. I came in, the numbers were here. Now when I got a hold of them and started to improve things, they were here. And it opens up a whole conversation during your interview about how you went through this process. And you can show your operational competence during this. So like, these are all little tiny metrics that I like to keep track of as a beverage manager.
Yeah.
So I can kind of slowly walk my way up that ladder of, my career and end up in the place I really, really want to be. So just, for other people in listening to the podcast, this could be another important side effect personally for your career, is a development like this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you build these skills, and any one of us sitting in any seat we're sitting in right now is probably naive enough to think, hey, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. Well, it's not always going to be the case, and you're especially in a vocational world like tending bar or serving tables, and there's always the next rung of establishment to get up to. There's always that next bar team that you want to be a part of, and you're right. As you start to build that personal portfolio, it's just as important as trying to keep this this bar up and running as much as possible. Just always got to remember to keep out for yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I've done quite a few inventories in my day. And I have a couple of recommendations that I like to kind of tell people, some small tips and stuff. But are there any kind of common pitfalls that you see people falling into with the inventory process?
Yes. Actually, the most common thing I have to tell owners and bar managers is actually don't make a martyr of yourself, to be completely honest with you. It's honestly true. I mean, we've both worked, I give my personal history. I've worked in this industry my entire adult life, and even before then. And it's a world, I like to call it a world of highly functional stubbornness, which is, I think pretty apt. It's definitely, and I include myself in that category too, because there's nothing better than that feeling of digging yourself out of the weeds without any help on a Friday night. Right. But in the truth, self-sufficiency, obviously a great asset to have on your side in this industry as you're building those personal kind of resume tools. But also being truly 100% self-sufficient in this world is completely unrealistic. Unless you're playing the part of host, server, bartender, busser, food runner, back server, chef, and manager, probably missing a whole slew of other job titles there. Unless you're doing all that at the same time, there's really no single part of a restaurant that can run without the other. If there's no one seating people, bring people into the restaurant, the kitchen's just standing there. What are they going to do? So no matter what, you're simply just one part of this massive organism that needs all aspects working symbiotically to come to life every single day. So I always say approach inventory collaboratively as a team. I can never say that word right. Collaborate together on your inventories. And not only is it going to improve the overall performance of your bar program, but also you're going to have more sweat equity among your bar team. And they're going to start taking more of that ownership, more of that pride of their position behind the bar. than they ever had before.
Sure.
So I generally say, one tip I usually give, bar managers and owners is to give every bar team member ownership of one storage area or bar area during inventory counts. And again, it's gonna get more buy-in from your team since they've put the time into this bar program to keep it running smoothly. And it's actually going to greatly increase the efficiency and accuracy of your inventory counts in the long run, because I'm sure you've been a part of many just marathon inventory counts. When I worked in retail anyway, it would take me and the owner anywhere between 8 and 12 hours to count the entire store.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we had a staff of about 15 people, but he only trusted me and himself to count these things. And that's why it would take us that long. And in the long run, I'm sure that the accuracy of those inventory counts come hour 6, 7, 8 through 12, starting to go, good enough. Good enough. Well, if that starts happening, that's a problem, because if you're starting to get complacent about your inventory, it means you're going to start not caring about your cash flow, which that's a scary thing to start get complacent about. So the more hands you have helping, the more trusted hands you have helping, I should say, the faster the counts will be and the more accurate they're going to be, because you're going to avoid what I call inventory fatigue, which is where you pick one up, it just, the bottle looks a little fuzzy. Or you're sitting on a case of Cabernet in the storage room and you forget that it's not a chair, and you don't actually take the count for those 12 bottles, or, one thing just disappears on your back bar where maybe it's your Johnny Blue, and then you think you went through an entire bottle of Johnny Blue overnight. And you never want that. Accuracy above all else is key. Obviously, you're never going to have down to the ounce accuracy, but at the same time, you want to be as accurate as possible with these counts.
Yeah, and to your point on the inventory fatigue, I know this happens in restaurants. There have been restaurants that I've been a part of where I walk in the next day as an opening bartender, and I know it was inventory because I can tell, because there's open beer bottles everywhere. There's a half drinking bottle of rye whiskey on the bar, and the managers, after 8 hours of marathon inventory taking, they want to celebrate. They want to kind of unwind a little bit. And to your point, I think there's definitely downstream effects to that too.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, then, not to mention that half bottle of rye that they just counted as in stock is now instantly out of stock.
Right. I mean, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Proper technique on inventory control.
But, yeah, no kidding.
I think definitely it is one of those things that happens in the industry, and I think
it's true.
To the point, the more people that you can spread this load out onto, and the faster it can be done, the more buy-in you get from your staff. It just makes it more sense across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
Get in, get out, get your job done, and then go out together for a drink afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And then whoever's in charge of running the bar team, whether it's the bar manager, the owner, kind of back to our question about why should they care, sweeten the pot a little bit, like, I want to take you out for a drink when we're done, or we're going to stay late tonight. We're doing inventory, but I got 5 pizzas coming in a case of beer, whatever it might be.
Right. Absolutely. No. Yeah. And there's quite a few other like ways of buying in that I've kind of come across, like opening the numbers up to the bartenders and showing them how they're progressing as far as the inventory numbers go, putting a small bonus on there, like, hey, if we hit our numbers, it's going to be worth it for the business in the long run. Yeah. And you get that buy-in, you get that sense of pride, like, all right, we're working towards a goal together. There's, I'm sure, a lot of different little tips and tricks as far as that goes.
Oh yeah.
For inventory management. So when you were doing pen and paper, analog version of inventory, is there any tips and tricks that you have for that?
I would generally suggest, for organizing anyway, from a pure end counter standpoint, if you're not the person who needs to be worrying about cost of goods or anything like that, if you're just literally getting your bartenders to help you out, organize everything for them ahead of time. If they're going to own your storage room, give them a storage room where everything is sheet to shelf, meaning they're going to start at one far end of that storage room on the top shelf, and everything on that list is exactly in the right order. So they have to do as little thinking as possible.
Absolutely.
And at that point, they're literally just taking a tally of these bottles. Because it's really, you want them to care about the amount of product in-house and things like that, take pride in the job. But at the same time, they don't need to be worrying about cost of goods in that moment in time. So I would generally suggest whoever's going to be doing the counting for you, if you're not the numbers person in the bar program, give them literally a product sheet with as little information on it as possible. Just absolute 1 liter. Boom. 3 bottles. Stoli, Raz 1 liter, 6 bottles, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
All the way down the list, left to right, top to bottom, however you want to organize it, as long as there's, like I said, as little thinking or guesswork involved from them as possible. Maybe that's the way I should put it, is the guesswork.
Sure.
Because everything's really cut and dry when it comes to inventory. The only thing that starts to get a little squiffy is when you're saying, is that 0.7 bottles or is that 0.8 bottles? That's where the objective side really starts to come into play, or subjective side. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as simple as possible, keep those sheets as easy as possible for your staff, and don't overload them. Obviously, if you've got 600 products on your product list for your bar, all of those for the most part, minus kegs, beers, and white wines, are probably going to be in your storage room. Now, if you're taking left front bar, which has 100 products, this other person takes the walk-in, which has 100 products, and you give this poor sap the storage room with 600 products, maybe split that out so it's not so huge, because essentially all you're doing is giving that one person inventory fatigue. And really, that storage room in this example is the biggest part of your bar program, because that's the majority of where your money is going to be kept. So as simple as possible on those actual manual sheets, the better, because then whoever has to take those counts and compile them, whether it's the bar manager or the owner, or even sometimes accountants I've seen who take these tally sheets and actually turn them into numbers for the bar. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who have the numbers that need to be worried about as far as cost of goods and things like that. And also, some people who invite people into inventory, aren't exactly the most trusting. So sometimes they don't want to put the value of these products on these sheets because they're afraid it might actually push someone to say, oh, that bottle is worth $75. Oh my gosh, maybe I should take that for myself. I feel like I'm not making enough hourly. Well, guess what? Join the ranks. You're a bartender or server. You're definitely not making enough hourly. So don't steal that whiskey. It's not worth your job. I promise you.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Now, that's definitely a good tip. I think, organizing your spreadsheets, if you're doing an analog version of inventory, just makes a ton of sense. The less page flipping and hunting.
Oh my gosh.
The faster it's going to go, the easier it's going to be for everybody. And I think this is where a lot of restaurants can make some really fine-tuned adjustments into their inventory process and make it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you can cut hours. You can cut hours off your counting time every week or every month just by keeping your sheets organized. I mean, if you started adding how many hours I spent flipping paper sheets at that wine shop, which were all alphabetically listed, by the way, yeah, it would be a bit of a time suck for sure.
Yeah. Now, did you guys organize by vintage as well? So like the 2012 versus 2013, or is it all kind of, I paid this price, so it's all kind of lumped into one inventory? I'm just
no, it was actually
professional level.
No, the way the wine, we had about 850 wine SKUs alone at that store. So the wine was actually separated out sparkling, white, red, and then by body structure, so lighter to fuller.
Okay.
That way, if someone said, "Hey, they brought in a picture, like I love this particular Chardonnay," like, "Oh, I don't carry that," but it stands to reason based on where these other wines of that region or other wines that would be similar to that are located on our wall. We can try to branch out, teach them about new wines, or even teach them about a new Chardonnay they might enjoy. That's not their quote unquote security blanket wine, as I used to like to call it. So that's how that was organized. So the wall, unfortunately, there was no semblance of alphabetical order, pricing tiers, just the fact that you'd pull a bottle and you'd have to flip through, and God forbid you have like A by Acacia Chardonnay first, and then next you got to go to like Sagazio's Infidel, because then you're jumping like 24 pages at the same time. So it was a bit of a struggle there.
Yeah.
Thankfully, our spirits and beers were grouped by more stylistically. Like ryes were together, bourbons were together. That was a little bit easier to maintain that side of the story for sure.
Sure. Yeah. I think my tip, something I worked out pretty quickly, is I'm fairly lazy. Actually, I'm efficient.
There you go.
So I kind of dip my toe into kind of the cash flow side of the business, and basically just ordered big in the beginning, like right after inventory. I do a big giant lump sum for my inventory that I can manage throughout the month, and do small orders to kind of maintain them. But my goal was, when I was counting inventory, I wanted as little stock in my stockroom as possible.
Yes.
Because then, that would take hours away.
Yeah.
I went from probably a $10,000 inventory, whatever it was, I can't remember, to probably a third of that size by the time I counted. So it just really kind of shaved everything off. I could turn my entire inventory in a 30-day window, which is, so powerful for a business not to sit on, $10,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 worth of stock for an entire year, or however long it takes you to turn that, which is a whole nother conversation we could get into.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
About that. But that was always one of my big, it was kind of a challenge for me, every month to look at, previous year's numbers, calibrate them and see where my business is headed, monitoring my cost of goods throughout the month so that I know I would hit my bonus no matter what.
Yeah.
And kind of go from there. And then, like I said, just lean out my inventory. Never run out of stock. I never wanted to do that.
No, there's nothing worse than that feeling.
Yeah. But I definitely wanted to have nothing but open bottles.
Yeah, no, I get that. Honestly, something that, we, or at least I talk about a lot with a lot of customers is, do you do that? Like, people wonder, do I do bulk or do I go with a lean inventory system? And there's really no right answer to it. I generally say, if you're a cash positive business and you're okay with bulk ordering like that, that's going to be fine. You're going to be just fine doing that. But so many of the people I work with, as you'd imagine, their entire inventory is, $2,500, and that's everything they're sitting on, and they can't be blowing out their budget. If they have $800 to spend this week, they might have to spend $600 of that because, oh no, look, my high water alarm is off. I need the plumber to come in and fix what's going on in the kitchen, or God knows what it is. So I try to help people on both sides of that because, if you do work with a lean inventory, you got to be really thrifty, and you got to be really fast on your toes. Like you mentioned before, if for some reason you miscalculated in your lean inventory cycle and you run out of a particular gin, you got to be ready to go with a backup, just ready, like something as similar as possible to substitute in that cocktail. Obviously, even with a lean inventory, you want to avoid 86ing anything, but some people are really, really uncomfortable with running with just enough to get by for a week or two, which I totally understand. But, if that's where you have to live, there's definitely ways to make it a successful system for you versus the bulk ordering.
Yeah, and I'll say that if you're in that kind of smaller restaurant environment or smaller bar environment where you are actively managing your cash flow, I will say that's probably one of the hardest positions to be in as a bar manager, because you have so many more variables that you have to consider versus, I just need this product. I'm going to order $2,000 from Southern Wine and Spirits and I'll be fine, versus I have $300 to spend this month. Week, to get product in and keep my doors open. And that's a really whole nother challenge. It's a lot of fun, but man, it can be super stressful.
It is. No, it is. I mean, I've walked into coming into 2:00, on call times where the bar manager is sitting just face down on the bar, head in hands, just shaking their head back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong? And I just finished inventory and I got my budget. I was like, I'm going to go get in my uniform right now. I'll be back in a little bit. I'll give you some time.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we keep talking about, and hopefully you can give us a good definition on this. We've hit on the term cost of goods before.
Yeah.
So what does that mean as far as like general definition for the bartenders?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally the way I kind of break it down for people is, let's just imagine one beverage as opposed to the entire program, whether it's a beer, wine, spirits, whatever it might be. So the cost of goods, let's say this particular wine is, $10 a glass on the menu. Your cost of goods is literally what it costs you to pour that one glass into that wine glass as you're selling it, or a mixed drink, everything that goes into that, underneath that actual, take your menu price, subtract all the raw goods that are going in there, either just that, 6 ounces or 5 ounces of Cabernet, or, maybe it's a Grey Goose martini. You're just taking that 3 ounces of Grey Goose, whatever that costs. Mm-hmm. So you get your $11 martini minus your $1.62 of Grey Goose. And that's really going to give you your cost versus your profit. Those two together are going to be basically making up your menu price.
Perfect. And then as it applies to an entire beverage menu, that's kind of the same thing, but a little bit more complicated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be, it's going to be an average across your entire program. So, generally broken down, you're going to have your beer, spirits, and wine programs across the board. And for me, generally the wine is my wheelhouse, having, been a sommelier. So that's easy for me to wrap my head around. But your overall cost of goods across your program, it's, you're kind of handcuffed in a lot of places where you want to fall upon a certain range. So it's hard to say like, this particular bar should be running at this percentage, or this one should be, running at this. I mean, I've seen little neighborhood bars that are cruising along with a 15% cost of goods average across the program. And I've seen larger restaurant groups across the country. Yeah, right. Exactly. And to that point where I'm wondering, how did you do this?
Yeah.
And then I've seen larger groups that, they're really comfortable operating at 28% because they're just so cash positive. They're okay with what they're doing. But yeah, a lot of it really depends on location, business model, your regular clientele, what are they like, and pricing thresholds of those regulars as well. If you can't charge $15 for a mixed drink like you can here in Boston or San Francisco, I'm sure of that happening, you're kind of handcuffed on what your actual cost of goods range is. But that being said, we generally advise our customers at BevSpot to operate in that 15 to 25% cost of goods. And that, again, is really kind of dependent on location and kind of concept of your actual bar, just to make sure they're maximizing profits as much as possible. That way, every, dollar that they sell, they're getting 75 cents back as profit kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, you kind of touched on it a little bit. Depending on the type of business you're running, your profits or your cost of goods would be very different, right? Yeah. So your neighborhood bar could run at a much higher cost of goods per se versus a high volume, let's say restaurant or bar or something like that. Do you find that they kind of, or a nightclub, but do you find that they kind of start to fall into specific categories as far as cost of good targets? Or does it not really depend too much on that?
I think everyone out there is going to, especially the first time they start a bar program or manage a bar program, they're like, I'm going to have the most efficient cost of goods ever. No one's ever going to see a cost of goods lower than mine. But then they start to realize their limitations with, the business, like you were just saying. So we see a lot of, nightclubs and exclusive places like that running a very low cost of goods, which makes perfect sense because, you're doing things like bottle service where you're, marking up a bottle of Grey Goose from $32.75 a liter, what it costs you, to $300 plus 2 pitchers of mixers on the menu. So you're running like a 5% pour cost on that bottle or 10% pour cost on that bottle. You see more cocktail-centric bars are generally running a slightly higher pour cost in the sense that you're putting really, really high-quality ingredients into these drinks. Sure. And a lot of those you're taking, man-hours and time to actually create yourself. And sometimes over months of, trying to create your own house vermouth, that can take a lot of time. Or getting the time to go get yourself some gum arabic and make yourself a whole slew of, gum syrups that you probably wouldn't be able to buy on the market kind of thing. So you're getting some really high quality handmade artisanal ingredients going into those, which is why you're going to places like, PDT in New York City, and you're willing to pay $16, $17, $20 for a cocktail. Right. But at the same time, they're charging you that because of all that hard work that's going into it. So those ones are going to run probably at a higher pour cost, I would imagine. And actually craft beer bars, it's really hard to run a low pour cost at a craft beer bar just because, too, everything is so expensive in the craft revolution right now, whether it's spirits or beer, because it's all handmade. It's all coming from, a few miles down the road where the head brewer owner is probably driving it to you himself, right out of the back of the station wagon and selling it to you right there. So you're not going to get the same deals you'd get from, AB InBev selling you a half barrel of Budweiser, versus, driving down the road here in Boston to the Bone Up here in Everett, Mass, and, getting a product from them at a, probably for 1 6 log, you're basically going to pay the same price as you would for a half barrel of Budweiser at Bud Light. So you still really can't charge $12 for a glass of beer in most places. So, so $7, and it's going to cost you $3.50 to pour it. You've got a 50% pour cost on that one beer. But the good news is you can always make it up somewhere else in your program. That's the thing about pour cost that I love, is that you can run a 30%, cost of goods on your craft beer program, but you can totally make that up on your cocktails. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. House Negroni, you can, cost you $1.15 to make. You can sell that for $10. That's perfect. That's perfect. Right. It's all about that balance. And I think a lot of people get caught in the weeds, and you probably see this a lot in your consulting. People get really hung up on one drink over the next. And, it's really not about one drink at a time. It really is about that big picture. It's about seeing that average across the board. And if, this one particular cocktail is your passion and it's a really expensive cocktail to make, and you're going to have to run a 50% pour cost on it, that's fine, as long as you are able to balance that out and have the savvy skill to take the rest of your program and balance that out. So you're just maximizing profits as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think to your point, this is where a lot of new bar managers kind of get lost in the numbers. It's not about the single unit pour cost. Yeah, it's about the entire beverage program as a whole. And I think once you start to understand that and you start to play with the variables, this is where it can get really exciting for me anyways. Okay, I'm only doing 10 pours of Johnnie Walker Blue in a month period, so I can have a lot of leverage as far as the amount I'm going to charge for this, but I'm going to make it up on my house cocktails or my well or somewhere else. Something I'm just pumping through low cost of goods area, I can make up and really make it appealing for a guest to order that higher end whiskey or something like that. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's part of the excitement for me of running the numbers behind the scene and seeing how all these little things start to kind of get mash up together.
Yeah,
for sure. Now, there was something else I was going to ask you. I can't remember. We were talking about targets. We were talking about cost of goods. Now, with cost of goods, this is also something that I get asked a lot, and something I have a little bit of experience with on my end. But when we're talking about these high-end spirits and these high-end wines and stuff like that, do you have a general kind of guideline to pricing? Because I'll just go ahead and let you take it from there.
No, it's tough. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. You really gotta, one of the main, for me anyway, the most important thing is, and it always has to be in this industry, it is the customer. I mean, they're the lifeblood of everything we do. If there were no customers, none of us would have a job in this world. And that's just as simply put as I can put it.
Right.
So first things first, think about your clientele. If you have a clientele that, like you said, will come in and they'll spend, $30, $40, $50 on a pour of Johnny Walker Blue, have at it. You can have a pretty healthy pour cost there. Same with really high-end bottles of wine. Since wine is kind of my wheelhouse, if you will, I always kind of equate this to finding your thresholds first. What's the lowest you're willing to put a price on your menu? Because that, for a lot of people, they're like, I don't want anything below $9 because I don't want to feel like I'm running some kind of bargain basement restaurant or something like that. Whatever your reasoning is fine. And then you got to think of the other end too. Like, what can I charge for a glass of wine on my wine list or a bottle of wine on my wine list that won't be so ridiculous someone just laughs me out of the industry, but also on the other side, like, what will people be willing to pay for what quality of product? So when it comes to Wines by the Glass, I think Wines by the Glass is one of those places like your cocktail program where you can make up a lot of traction as far as cost of goods and things like that. And the general rule of thumb, if you're wondering if you should serve it by the glass, is find your lower threshold, find your higher threshold. Let's say it's $9 to $15 for a glass of wine. And whatever you pay wholesale for that single bottle of wine. So if it's $10, I generally suggest making that glass of wine $10 on your list. Because as soon as you open that cork, that bottle can't be retrieved whatsoever. You need to get your investment back as soon as you pull that cork out of that bottle. So it means $10 for that first glass. Awesome. I got my cost of goods covered. Everything else is gravy after this. Now, when it comes to things that are lower than that threshold, let's say I bought a really great deal. I got a $7 bottle of wine. I'm not about to charge $7 for a glass on my wine list. So I put it at that lowest threshold, put it right at $9 there. So you're getting a little bit more profit from those bottles right there. And you say, hey, push these things here. Now for higher end bottles of wine, it's hard because you're not going to make as much money no matter what. So let's say I spend, $100 on a bottle of wine. If I follow the same markup plan, you're generally getting, 4 to 5 glasses out of a bottle of wine, depending on if you're pouring, 5 ounces or 6 ounces. You can't do the same markup for a bottle of wine because I know I can't buy a bottle for $100 and I can't put it on my wine list for $400.
Right.
That would alienate people really, really quickly. So for those higher end products, start with the clientele, see what they'd be comfortable with. And sometimes you can even, if you have regulars, you can flat out ask them, if they're there often enough to be supporting your business, you should be asking them these questions like, hey, Johnny, come here for a second. If I put a $17 glass of wine on the list, do you think that's ridiculous? And they say, no, I actually probably try it. And then you kind of feel them out a little bit that way. So generally for high-end wine bottles, I generally do a 100% markup in the sense that if I bought that bottle for $100, I'll put it on my list for $200. So I'll have a 50% cost of goods in that respect.
Sure.
And again, it's about the balance. You can have these, 5 to 10 really passion project, high-end bottles of wine, high-end bottles of whiskey, whatever it is, just don't overload that side of your program. As long as you're not weighing that much more than everything else that's actually going to pull in the real cash flow and the real profit, you're in good shape. But definitely my general rule of thumb is that depending on your establishment, I generally go 80-20 or 90-10. 10 to 20% of your program should be what you're most passionate about as far as single products, higher end products, things like that, because you want to represent a bit of yourself as well to your clientele. But at the same time, you don't want to completely bog down your entire, whiskey list or wine list with, really, really hard to come by 25-year scotches or, a 1982 Chateau Margaux, which
Right.
you'll never sell on your wine list, depending on where you are. And the good news is we have a really, really great tool for this, completely free tool. You were mentioning our resources earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We have a really great drink pricing calculator on our public site. So if there's ever any question whatsoever what you should be charging for something, all you got to do is plug in the raw cost of goods, say what you want your say what you want your pour cost percentage to be, and we'll pump out a really quick answer for you so you can kind of see what you should be charging for these products. Again,
that resource is probably one of the most valuable and one that I point a lot of people into. I think it's one of the best out there as far as, getting single pour costs down. I think you guys do more than one too, right? You can do multiple items in there.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's probably one of the more valuable parts of it is being able to build those cocktails together, especially if you're a program that uses a lot of really custom ingredients. Because if you are, let's say you're making a lot of your own simple syrups or a lot of your own just infusions in general, you should actually have cost of goods on those too. Because if you're not calculating those, I mean, I know it's, figure out if you're making some kind of infused balsamic to throw as a little garnish on something or whatever it might be, you should know what that costs as well, because those a lot of times can be the more expensive ingredients than the alcohol. So you can build all that cost right in there as well. You can have as many items in a drink as you want on that drink pricing tool. And it'll kind of you'll give your own threshold, your own percentage that you're aiming for, and it'll tell you exactly what you should probably charge for that cocktail.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. And I think, there's, like I said, there's so many valuable resources in there. If anybody hasn't been to their website, go to BevSpot, check out the resources. And it is absolutely a primer in bar management 101. So, as soon as you're done with this podcast, go check that out. Now, I kind of want to wrap this all up and with one new thought, something I didn't really get exposed to until further in my bar career, and it's the idea of variance. We've done the inventory, we've gathered all this information, we've given it to the appropriate people, and then let's say you're a bartender or you're a bar manager and you have the owner or the accountant coming in and shaking her finger at you saying we have a 20% variance, which is fairly common, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Absolutely. Well, I will say this. Everything in this world, whether it's in restaurants or not, everything comes back to the bottom line. Mm-hmm. So it's no different when it comes to inventory in bars or restaurants. And for most, inventory is just a way to check on stock to make sure you know what you have on hand versus what you need to order more of. And it acts as so much more than that, as you mentioned, variance. So from taking regular inventory, you find your usage, which is, literally week over week, month over month, what you're going through in product. Right. And then if you compare that, that usage number, let's say it's a week-long inventory cycle, compare that usage number to what your point of sale says you actually used in raw cost of goods, you're going to have your variance. That's the difference between those two as a percentage. Now, for lack of a better term, variance is really loss, right? So you can never expect to have 0% variance, since it's absolutely impossible to be that efficient, especially with, draft beer and things like that in this world. But the closer you can get to 0%, the tighter and more profitable your bar program is. And really, lost product equals lost profits, which if gone unchecked long enough equals out of business. That's how I kind of equate it too. But it really is, it's just your difference of, it could be things that were misrung or not rung in, but given away over the bar. It could be that you counted inventory wrong. It could stem from that. So that's one of the main things of inventory, is you have to be as accurate as possible, because it really does dictate everything down the line. Cost of goods, we were just talking about, variance, being able to tell what you used versus what you sold and why that discrepancy is happening. That's a massive thing to be able to understand, because if you can pinpoint what is causing your variance, and sometimes it's as simple as literally fixing the tap handle on a particular, draft line. It's just dripping. It's dripping all night long. That could add up to pints and pints and pints of beer over the course of a year. Right. It could be something as simple as that, or as devious as someone's literally walking out of the back door with a case of beer every single night. Yep. But really important to be able to understand how to pinpoint variance. And then from there, it's really up to the business themselves to dig deeper and discover where that might be coming from.
So what would a healthy variance number percentage be? Because I know that from people I've talked to, I actually gave a talk on inventory management. And at the end of it, a couple operators came up to me and said, I didn't really understand variance. I'd had my inventory professionally done. They came up to me and they said I had anywhere from a 40% variance, which I was like, whoa.
That's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. And the person right after him came up and said, I have a 60% variance. And I was like, are you kidding me? And they're like, yeah, we have a $15 million a year restaurant. We never take inventory, this kind of stuff. So they're cash positive. They're always cash positive. But so when we take a look at beverage programs, when we see a healthy cost of goods number, does that always mean a healthy variance?
Does not always mean a healthy variance.
Right.
The cost of goods is again one part of the puzzle, and the cost of goods, all it's going to show you is your potential to make profits.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you have the potential to make, every dollar I sell, I have a potential to make 85% or 80% of that as profits. Now, the variance comes from actual practice. It comes from the actual physical act of counting these goods and selling them in a responsible way where you can cover as much of this information as possible. So I've seen people who get, speaking of people who get caught in the weeds on things, I've seen people who get really, really uncomfortable when they have any variance.
Sure.
And I try to explain to them, this is just, it always will be. If you're throwing a negative 5% variance out there, it's because you're actually running a really tight program if you have 5% variance. In fact,
Sure.
that's almost unheard of.
Yeah.
Every single week anyway. You could run a week with 5% variance, but if you're running a year, 2 years, 5 years with that kind of variance,
you're doing pretty damn good.
You're doing something that most people aren't, if that's the case.
Yeah.
But the range I generally see for a nice healthy variant, because it does fluctuate. 1 week is never going to replicate itself perfectly week over week or month over month or even year over year, sadly, in this industry. I generally see that, like you said, 25 to 20% is a good place to be. If you're running below 5% or even below 10%, sometimes, to be honest with you, I'm slightly skeptical a little bit. Maybe someone's in there doctoring the numbers a little bit, but there are truly programs out there that are that efficient and they really just aren't leaving anything on the table.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the minute I started to understand, I was always focused on cost of goods because that's where my bonus was tied to.
Yeah.
Was that. But once I started to understand, there's a whole nother metric out there that I need to be paying attention to, is variance. And that's a pretty critical one. Then
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, now I see how all these things are to match together. And now I have this bigger picture of what a healthy inventory and beverage program should look like.
Yeah.
So,
which is why you mentioned the finger wagging. That's the thing most owners should care about, is the variance, because it represents lost possible profits. And for them, that's the most important thing. They're in business.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily here to make friends all the time. I've worked for very magnanimous owners. I've worked for owners who are incredibly, incredibly aloof and never around. And when they are, they're wagging that finger. It's because that variance is off. And,
right.
As soon as you start messing with someone else's money is when they start coming out of the woodwork a lot more quickly. So yes, if you care about your career growth, job security, and potentially any kind of equity, I would definitely be focused on variance as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I think that is a good spot to kind of leave it at. I think we covered a lot. I'm really grateful that we covered so much, and I can't thank you enough for your expertise. Now, when we take a look at your website, as far as the resources go, where are some real highlights for you on the resources page? I have a couple of my own, but since you had a hand in creating some of these, which ones are your favorites?
Yeah, honestly, staying on topic, we've got a fantastic free inventory resource. And it's literally just an inventory template that is completely blank. You can download it yourself, and it's essentially a completely formatted Excel spreadsheet that you can customize to your own business, your own product list. And that's fantastic for people who really want to take that first step forward into the world of taking inventory, but maybe don't want to do it as analog as I've suggested in the past. That's fantastic. In fact, I generally recommend that inventory template for bar managers who are more number savvy and are looking to actually have that information, because you can put cost of goods on there as well. And really, if you have any Excel expertise, you can take it even further with, custom formulas that you can plug in there yourself to kind of figure out even yield on certain cocktails if you want to go that far with it. But yeah, I would highly suggest the inventory template. We touched briefly on the drink price calculator, which I think for first timers out there and for early adopters or even bartenders who are looking to try to up their game to the next level. Or honestly, home mixologists. It's a great way to go as well, just to kind of understand how much money you're putting into every single drink you actually make. So drink price calculator is fantastic. And then you mentioned first-time bar managers. I think the Bar Manager's Handbook is one of the best tools out there to really kind of wrap your head around the first steps of becoming a bar manager. There's so much that you're going to learn on the fly, and what it can't teach, I will say this, what the handbook can't teach is this. It's being able to talk to people. It's being able to coach, being able to kind of bring people into the next level themselves as a mentor, as a bar manager. And we also have really fantastic free webinar resources that touch on those kinds of things as well. So a smattering of free resources to kind of dive into the industry if you're either just kind of toeing the line or you're ready to kind of take the dive into becoming a full-fledged bar manager, manage his whole inventory side of the bar program.
Yeah, no, and I know I've said this a couple times, but they really are some of the best out there. I wouldn't be saying that unless I truly believed it, because there's so much good material on here. So if that's something you want to do and educate yourself and take yourself to the next level, as Trevor was mentioning, this is a really good place to start. I mean, and it's all free. So, do yourself a service and go check that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else exciting coming up, or anything you want to share?
Man, oh man, there's always something exciting going on here.
I know.
Trying to think what our featured cocktail is going to be as soon as I get off the webinar or off the podcast today. I know. We have a very, very miniature bar in our office ourselves. I think I've got a Negroni on my horizon, I would imagine, on a Friday afternoon, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
A lot of exciting stuff coming up here. We're always kind of working on new solutions, new resources for the industry. And then I'm always trying to reach out and get as many new resources out there myself from a blog standpoint and from just an educational standpoint as much as possible to the industry whole, if you will. So.
Perfect. And is there any social media channels that you guys like to promote? Anything that you really focus on sharing your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're always active on Instagram, always active on Facebook, so always check those out for our most up-to-date, any kind of events we're hosting outside of the office, or even sometimes we're hosting events in the office as well, because, we try to treat ourselves as much like a bar as possible after business hours, of course. So yeah, check out our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter is always active as well, at BevSpotHQ, I believe, Sarah. Nailed it, at BevSpotHQ, there we go. Yeah, definitely active on social media all the time. So.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Trevor. I can't thank you enough for your time, and I hope this kind of made inventory a little bit more approachable for people, and hopefully they won't run for the hills. Oh God, I hope so. We need more open restaurants in this country. That's for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, man. Thanks, Chris. Take care. Cheers. Bye. Thanks again to Trevor from BevSpot for sharing his expertise in inventory management and for all the tips and tricks along the way. Hopefully you picked up a few things that'll make the next inventory a lot more productive and enjoyable. I really like the tip about the pizza and a beer for the staff that helps you out with inventory. I think that's just a good thing to do. We'll have all of the links to the resources that we mentioned in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/129, or you can head over to their website at bevspot.com/resources and take a look around for yourself. So we'll have some more episodes for you in the future, but until then, have a great shift, everyone, and cheers.
Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.